In today's lesson, we will talk about basic communication skills. It's imperative that every minister be effective in communicating with other people. There is a gap that must be bridged in interpersonal communication. The gap is the difference between what I said and what the person listening to me thought I said. The gap is produced as a result of what my brain perceives as reality in the external world and its interpretation of both the internal and external environment. This gap is the result of interfacing two worlds. One is the external world that I perceive through my senses. The second is the inner world of my brain, where I must constantly interpret both that which is going on inside me as well as attempting to bridge the gap that occurs when I try to make contact with the outside world. Now, what will you learn during this session? You will learn 4 private elements affecting communication. You will learn how a message is communicated. You will learn what is involved in codifying and decodifying a message. We'll examine the importance of using feedback and then how to use questions to gain valuable feedback in the communicating process. Now let's get started. How do we close that communication gap between the sender of a message and the receiver? Well, there are 4 things inside the sender that we must be aware of. 4 things inside the sender of the message when information is being sent to another person. These 4 things are feelings, intentions, attitudes, and thoughts. Feelings. These are private feelings that the person sending a message feels. These are fired off as a result of a speaker speaking. Number 2, intentions. Intentions are what this individual wants to communicate. It is what the listener will need to then decode if they're going to understand the message. It is the intention of the person. And then number 3, the attitude inside the sender. Is the person having a good day? Are they emotionally stable? Are they in control of their own feelings? What kind of attitude do they have? An attitude is always observed by one's body language. And then number 4, thoughts. What thoughts are they intending to communicate? Now, all of these attributes, these private internal elements that affect communication, all of these are private. So the listener cannot fully know what is behind the message inside the sender of a message. This is why communicating is so difficult. We're trying to understand what an individual has said to us when it is filtered through his or her feelings, intentions, attitudes, and thoughts. You see, why learning to communicate is so important. It has so many different elements to it, but we must put all the elements together and then arrive at the message. In the previous slide, we talked about private internal elements affecting communication. Now, in this slide, we're going to move to public behavior. In order for the speaker to communicate his private world, so the hearer can understand what he's saying and what the message means, then there are certain public behaviors that are provided by the speaker. These are externals that help us to understand the message. Number 1 is the words he uses. But notice only 7% of the total message is communicated through words. That does not negate the importance of words, but it does tell us that there's more in a message than just simply one's words. There is also the physiological or body language. I'd rather use the term body language. Notice that body language makes up 55% of the total message. And then notice that tone of voice. The tone of one's voice also is an indicator of what the message is all about. A harsh tone communicates something very harshly. Now I'm going to use some examples to try to communicate to you exactly what I mean. You can use these three words: I love you. You can use them in a number of ways. For example, I love you, or I love you. You hear the difference in those words? The same words, but they are words that communicate. Now, when you are communicating with an individual, it is absolutely imperative that we understand body language and the tone of voice as well as the words. This is where social media breaks down. You really don't understand the emotion of the person that's communicating with you. You do not hear the tone of their voice or their body language. All you see is their words. When you have words, you only have 7% of the total message. I want to challenge you to become a student of body language and the tone of voice of individuals. Be sure that your tone of voice and your body language match your words. For if your words say one thing and your body language and tone of voice say something else, the person will not hear your words. They will only hear your voice tones and your body language. That will be the message they will remember. Here is a graphic that hopefully will help you understand what we've been talking about more clearly. We've talked about three areas. We've talked about words, body language, and tone of voice. These three areas provide the means by which people transmit information that is private from inside themselves to the hearer in the external world. Now, this process is called codifying or encoding. Then when the receiver hears and sees the other's communication, they must decodify or decode that message and in the process figure out the meaning. Here you see two figures communicating with each other. One has in his mind tree. He puts it in words, body language, and tone of voice, and he sends that message by the channel of words to the ear of the listener. This person, after receiving the message, then must decodify or decode the message and understand its meaning. It really is an opportunity to exercise the ability to figure out the meaning of the message. And in this case, it's tree. That's what the word is. That's what the communicator is trying to say to the person listening. On this slide, you will see a simple definition for two words: codifying and decodifying. Codifying is the process of using words, tone of voice, and body language to transmit information from inside the sender to the hearer in the external world. Decodifying is the receiver hears and sees the message and figures out what it means. Earlier, we talked about the private internal elements affecting the process of codifying. Those were feelings, intentions, attitudes, and thoughts. Now, the message sent by the speaker affects also similar kinds of things, but not identical to those of the speaker. The process of decodifying is also private in the listener and cannot be known by the speaker in a direct way. These are feelings. These feelings are fired off by the words and the actions of the speaker. Certain words will trigger certain reactions from certain people, and certain tones of voice and certain body languages will trigger feelings inside the hearer of a message. Then the second thing I want you to notice is extrapolations. These are inferences drawn from what the listener believes the speaker intended to say. Number 3, attitudes. Filters regarding the meaning of a message of a speaker come from these attitudes. Attitudes, again, can be seen by one's body language. They can also be heard through one's tone of voice. And then thoughts, that is, the inner dialogue that goes on privately within the listener while the speaker is speaking. This may interrupt the communicating process because the listener may not listen completely to what the message really is all about. He's thinking about, what will I say next in response to what the speaker has communicated? So you can see how complex the process of communication is. The major communication gap occurs when the listener infers something different or extrapolates something different from what the speaker intends. It is quite possible to decode different messages from the same encoded message. Because of this potential gap in the interpersonal communication process, it's important that the listener feed back to the speaker what he received. Feedback methods provide an orderly way of assuring that which is being sent is also that which is being received. There are several ways to give information back to the speaker to check out your comprehension. We'll examine and look at only a couple. One method you can use is the paraphrase. The act of saying back to the speaker in your own words what you heard the speaker say is a paraphrase. Now, in order to do this, you will need to identify key words in the person's statement or their stories. The key words are usually verbs, nouns, and adjectives. These carry the meaning of a verbal sentence. Now, use this structure. You'll use a stem, plus you'll restate the content with key words. For example, here's the stem. You are saying that, and then you complete the context of their statement with key words. You are saying that Mrs. Jones was late for the meeting. Here's another stem you could use. What I hear you saying is that Mrs. Jones came into the meeting late and disrupted the flow of the meeting. Here's another stem. You are telling me that Mrs. Jones, in a disorderly way, entered the meeting. Here's another stem plus restating the content with key words. If I am hearing you right, you are saying that Mrs. Jones entered the meeting late. And then the last example I will give you is, let me say what I am hearing, and then you repeat or restate the content with the key words. A paraphrase can be used to check the content and the meaning of a person's message. Now, when you communicate with another person, it's very useful to keep checking out the meaning of what the other person is saying. Do not assume that what you infer is what was sent. You may be decoding or decodifying the message incorrectly. Now, let's talk about productive questions for just a few moments. Productive questions could be defined as the ability to ask questions based on ideas or feelings, deleted information, distortions, and responses to other questions you have asked. Ask congruent questions, that is, those that are relevant to the subject that is shared by the person to whom you are listening. Watch for deletions. Deletions can be described as a hole in the communication, a statement that is generalized and leaves out specific details. A deletion is when some specific facts, persons, feelings, and events are left out. Productive questions can help fill in the blanks. Here are some potential examples of productive questions. Perhaps a person makes this statement: I did not like what happened at the meeting. Now, there's a lot of information that's left out there, and you can ask questions to just simply probe. Here are some questions you might ask. Well, what exactly did you not like about the meeting? Or you could ask, what meeting are you referencing? Those are good questions to get at what was left out of the statement. Then distortions can be a part of the communication process. Distortions are the universal human modeling process by which we manipulate our perspectives and remembered experiences. I like to talk about linguistic distortions. These are expressed by such words as every, never, always, continually, forever, every time, nobody, everyone, no one, all the time, constantly, and everywhere. Whew. I'm exhausted just saying all of those linguistic distortions. Here's an example. Bill might say, "Every time you run a meeting, we never get to discuss any of the issues. You constantly put things to a vote too soon. You do that all of the time." Now, what would be an easy response to Bill? Well, you could just simply say, "Every time? Bill, are you saying that when I run a meeting, we never discuss the issues?" This is a helpful way to get to the meaning of the message. By checking the distortion, you bring the overstatement into the realm of reality. Frequently, the distortion is an attempt to get attention through emphasis on an idea. For example, "No one down at the church cares whether I show up or not." You might just ask the question, "No one?" Or here's another example. "Everyone went on vacation but us." You could ask the question to help clear up this distortion. Just simply say, "Everyone?" Here's another example. "You are never home." Never? It is possible to respond to each of these distortions by repeating, "No one, everyone, never." But don't overuse this technique. Also, your voice tone must be relatively neutral to use this technique. Now, I want to encourage you to be careful how you ask questions. It's important that we ask questions properly, and on the next slide, we will discuss that issue. Using questions to detect distortions or deletions is important. However, let's look at some things we should not do in asking questions. Number one, do not inappropriately change the subject so that the listener does not have to deal with his or her own emotions. Particularly males are guilty at this point. When a female begins to cry, it seems that we automatically want to change the subject so that person does not have to vent their emotions, or we don't have to hear them vent their emotions. So be very careful about inappropriately changing the subject. And then number two, be careful that you don't invade their private space by asking questions that are too intimate for the trust level that you enjoy with the person. And then number three, be careful that you don't make statements while putting it into a form of a question. We can ask loaded questions by using a sarcastic tone, making a statement by putting it into a form of a question. For example, "John, have you stopped beating your wife?" Well, there's really not a good answer. If he says yes, it means he's been beating his wife, and if he says no, then that certainly condemns him as abusing his wife. I hope that you will choose your words correctly. I hope that, and I pray that you will use your tone of voice in a way that will accentuate your message, and then use your body language to help communicate the message you really are trying to send. We will look at part 2 of developing basic communication skills in our next lesson.